Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today's question is, can I analyze the case of Stephanie Parze? Just a reminder, I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and consider supporting me on Patreon. I will put the link to Patreon in the description for this video. First, I'll look at the background of this case, move to the timeline of the crime, then offer my analysis. Stephanie Nicole Parze was born on February 19, 1994, and lived in Freehold Township, New Jersey. This is 30 miles east of Trenton. Stephanie, along with her three sisters, were raised by her father Ed and her mother Charlene. Growing up, Stephanie was active in a few sports, including hockey and softball. She went to school to be a cosmetologist and had a dream of being a professional makeup artist. In addition to working in this field, Stephanie often worked as a babysitter. In 2019, Stephanie started a romantic relationship with a man named John Osbiljan. The two had met on a dating website. John had been born in July 1990, so he was about 3.5 years older than Stephanie. He lived in Freehold, New Jersey, and worked for a financial services company in Staten Island, New York. The romantic relationship between Stephanie and John was tumultuous and on again, off again. In June 2019, Stephanie called 911 and reported that John grabbed her by the face and pulled her hair. The altercation occurred right after Stephanie attempted to end her romantic relationship with John. Despite the involvement of law enforcement, nothing came of Stephanie's accusation. On September 23, 2019, John allegedly attacked Stephanie, causing her to run down the street in terror. She called her mother and accused John of striking her in the side of the head with the back of his hand. After this, John allegedly struck Stephanie's hand as well. Stephanie's mother called 911, and John was arrested and charged with simple assault domestic violence. Just like the previous incident in June, this altercation occurred right after Stephanie attempted to end the relationship. Now moving to the timeline of the crime. On Wednesday, October 30, 2019, Stephanie, her mother, her three sisters, and other female relatives attended a show at the Stress Factory Comedy Club in New Brunswick, New Jersey. The performer that night was a psychic named Cindy Kaza. When the show was over, Stephanie went back to her parents' house. She left at about 10:30 p.m. with the intent of driving to her grandmother's house, which was 3.2 miles away. Stephanie had been staying there caring for her grandmother's dogs. Before Stephanie left her parents' house, her mother told her to call or text when she made it home, but Stephanie failed to do so. Concerned about Stephanie, her parents and her sister Carissa drove to her residence on the next day, October 31, at around 4 p.m. They noticed Stephanie's white Hyundai Sonata was parked in the driveway. When Charlene and Carissa entered the house, they saw that all the lights were on, and they found Stephanie's shoes and coat. There was no sign of Stephanie anywhere. At around 8 p.m., her mother and her sister Carissa returned to the home. They found Stephanie's phone on the side of the couch. Even though they could not unlock the phone, they could see there was a message on it indicating Stephanie had failed to show up for a 9 a.m. babysitting job that day. Family members desperately contacted Stephanie's friends in an effort to find her, but no one had seen her. The man who was facing charges for allegedly attacking Stephanie in September, John Osbiljan, told one of Stephanie's sisters that he had spent the night with Stephanie. When he left on October 31, she was still in the house. Stephanie's mother contacted the police and reported her missing. A massive search effort was initiated, but Stephanie was not found. The police focused their investigation on John, as he was an obvious suspect. On November 8, 2019, search warrants were executed, which led to John's arrest. The arrest was not for murder. Rather, investigators found 10 inappropriate images of children on John's phone. On the last day Stephanie was seen alive, October 30, John had sent 10 messages through text and Facebook in the span of just over 9 minutes. All the messages went unanswered. Among other things, he said she always had to make the relationship blank, and he called her a blanking blank. The last blank is an expletive that rhymes with the word blunt. The police noticed that John had marks on his neck, indicating he may have been involved in some type of physical altercation. Despite how bad it looked for John, there wasn't enough evidence to charge him with any crime related to Stephanie. He was released on Tuesday, November 19, 2019, after the state failed to convince a judge that he was homicidal. They were worried that he was going to kill again. As it turns out, the concerns were justified. There would be one more fatality. 3 days later, on Friday, November 22, John's body was found in the garage of his home at 198 Kings Mountain Road in Freehold. He had brought an end to his own life by hanging. 2 notes were recovered at the scene, one to his parents and one to an ex-girlfriend. I will talk more about these notes in my analysis. Based on the evidence, including the notes, investigators believed that John killed Stephanie. He worked alone, and the case was closed. Unfortunately, they did not know where Stephanie's body was. This would change on January 26, 2020, when 2 teenagers walking on the side of Route 9 in Old Bridge, New Jersey, contacted the authorities. They had observed a body 15 feet from the road, behind a wedding venue. The body belonged to Stephanie. Her cause of death was never determined. Now moving to my analysis. Here are my thoughts on a few areas that stood out to me in this case. Item number 1. John Osbiljan was 29 years old at the time of his death. He had a history of negative interactions with law enforcement. In 2010, John was convicted of drug possession. Despite this, he managed to find employment with 3 different financial firms in Staten Island. He was fired from his last job on October 31, 2020. In addition to being arrested twice in connection with alleged attacks on Stephanie, John had been accused of domestic violence by 2 other women. He had an active restraining order against him from a previous dating relationship in New York City. Reports from former lovers indicated that John liked rough sex, which involved attempting to strangle partners to the point where they were rendered unconscious. Item number 2. There were several warning signs available to Stephanie in this case. John had allegedly attacked her on 2 occasions and was facing charges for the second attack. Stephanie recognized that John was dangerous and feared for her life. On October 1, 2019, about 4 weeks prior to Stephanie's murder, she spotted a handprint on a bathroom mirror in her grandmother's house. It looked as though somebody had placed their hand on the mirror and moved their hand down, causing long vertical marks from their fingers. A few days after making this disturbing discovery, Stephanie found that a pet parakeet had died in a cage. She felt like her grandmother's house was haunted or possessed. Item number 3. As I mentioned, John left 2 notes behind. Let's take a look at these notes. In the note to his parents, John wrote that he was sorry about all this craziness. He had been miserable for a long time and had enough. What they would hear in the news was true, except for the charge related to the inappropriate images. He would never do that. John indicated that he dug himself into a deep hole and could not serve life in prison. He continued by saying that he loved his ex-girlfriend, she was good to him, and they had an amazing life, but he blanked it up. The ex-girlfriend to whom he was referring was not Stephanie, rather a different woman in New York who had an active restraining order against him. John concluded his note by saying, "I love you guys," followed by a smiley face. Presumably, this note represented a confession to murdering Stephanie, but John never indicated where he disposed of her body. It seems unusual that John was so focused in this note on the ex-girlfriend and not on Stephanie. Here he just killed Stephanie for rejecting him, but he was more interested in expressing his love for someone else who also rejected him. In the note to his ex-girlfriend, John proclaimed his love for her. He did not know what he was thinking when he blanked their relationship up. She was the best thing that ever happened to him, and he will never feel for another lady the way he did for her. John talked about how he tried to reach out to her, but she had obtained a restraining order. He asked why and indicated he was upset because he really needed her in a huge way. He wished his former lover an amazing life and said she deserved it. At this point, John made a reference to the girl in the news. Presumably, he was talking about Stephanie. He said that she was a piece of blank. She hurt him over and over and was a horrible person. John insisted that his former lover was the only person he ever loved and asked her to assist his parents with his funeral. He apologized and said, quote, "I wish I could go back in time and correct my mistakes, but I can't," unquote. The note ended with a frowning face. I think what John was doing here was trying to make sense of his own feelings and attempting to make his former lover feel sorry for him. He lived his life with strong stalker-like feelings and desired for these feelings to impact other people. Stephanie was dead, so she was not going to react to his expressions of insecurity and undying love. For this reason, John decided to target another woman who he stalked. He wanted her to have feelings of love for him, miss him, and regret her decision to reject him. This is why he attempted to drag her into the planning of his funeral. He wanted her to gaze with sadness upon his body. Even after murdering his most recent love interest, John somehow believed that a prior love interest would remember him fondly. This is how distorted his thinking was. Like his ex-girlfriend would say to herself, well, John just killed his lover, but he didn't really like her. This somehow means he must have really loved me and would never murder me. Why did I ever reject him? What a catastrophic mistake. He was the best lover in the world, except for the murder part. Item number 4, what do I think happened in this case? This is just a theory, my opinion. Stephanie was desperate to find a long-term romantic partner. She did not want something casual. She was looking for someone to marry. She hoped that John would be a suitable partner. John was self-centered, impulsive, excitement-seeking, aggressive, violent, erratic, obsessive, insecure, petty, vindictive, cold, callous, emotionally unstable, sadistic, and exceedingly creepy. His undesirable traits were disguised by his charisma, which led Stephanie to believe that he was the perfect lover. By the time she realized he was dangerous, John had already become obsessed with her. John was a stalker. Specifically, he was a combination of a rejected, resentful, and predatory stalker. He simultaneously pursued reconciliation and revenge, intimidated and terrorized Stephanie, and resorted to the use of lethal force. Stalkers like this often have cluster B personality pathology, so narcissistic, antisocial, borderline, and histrionic traits. John was particularly angry and had many reasons to be depressed and hopeless. For example, he was having trouble with employment, facing domestic violence charges, and he lived in New Jersey. John pursued multiple targets at the same time and ultimately selected a target who was vulnerable. This ease of access component did not exist with all his former lovers. For example, the ex-girlfriend who had the restraining order and lived in New York was not targeted. If Stephanie had not been vulnerable, John would have waited or moved on to another target. Either way, of course, tragedy would have eventually occurred for someone. John was determined to bring pain and misery to others in order to maintain his narcissistic fantasy. Those are my thoughts on the case of Stephanie Parze. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They consistently generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be informative. Thanks for watching.